Now, towards the end of the 70s, they weren't making exploitation films anymore, so I had to get involved in other things in order to make a living. But the censors dogged me every way I went, I can tell you. I was appearing in a film for the Arena series called Climb Every Mountain or Nothing Succeeds Like Failure. And it was about the joy of failing. And the director, Nigel Finch, required me to go around London's West End, stand outside theatres and predict which shows were going to close. And so we picked a show called On the 20th Century. Not a bad show, actually. I'd seen it in New York and I enjoyed it. But I'd heard on the grapevine it wasn't going to have much of a run. So I stood outside the theatre and I was very disparaging about it. The programme went out. I think it was BBC Two, so it wouldn't have had an enormous number of viewers. But the next thing I knew was that we'd all, that's the producers, the BBC, me, we'd all had a writ from the producer of On the 20th Century, Harold Fielding. I've still got it here, and I can show it to you because Harold is long gone. Anyway, it was a bit frightening, I have to say. This was my most high-profile writ. He was a very powerful man indeed, Harold Fielding. And the pages of this stuff, his solicitor rather, quoted what I'd said outside the theatre. This is what I said. This looks bad, or this looks really bad. The sort of award-winning Broadway musical they can't do over here. Some of the spectacular effects that the Broadway audiences loved so much have been cut back. And I also claimed that Dora Bryan had left the show before it opened in order not to be associated with a failure. Well, you know, the word was on the street. Everyone knew what was going on. And then I said, all is not well with On the 20th Century, I'll give it 6 weeks. Well, Harold didn't like that at all, and he claimed that because I said that bookings had plummeted. Hard to prove, and indeed he couldn't prove it. So the case never went to court, and everybody, not least me, breathed a sigh of relief. Hang on, I just have to check the time because everything is very closely timed on this show. Another story. It was only 2 years later and I got into more trouble. And this time it was because a friend of mine, Alan Jones, had suggested to me that I write about the history of British sex films because I'd been working for a magazine that reviewed every film released in Britain. And so I'd been to see a lot of these sex films, probably more than any other critic. And Alan thought I was an authority. We took this to a magazine called Cinema, and the publisher liked it. It was published by Marvel, which stood us in good stead, as it turned out, because they had very tough lawyers. Anyway, no sooner had the second episode of this series, this history of British sex films, been published, than another writ appeared, this time from solicitors representing a director called Arnold Louis Miller. Now, he made sex films, but latterly he made terrible sponsored documentaries, which went out with the main feature. And the solicitor, here's the carbon copy of the letter that I was sent, 1982 this, and they quoted what I'd said. For the past 10 years, the company's sole output, this is Arnold Louis Miller's company, Global, The company's sole output has been short interest films regularly booed off the screen in Hampstead and Kensington, but apparently accepted without murmur everywhere else. Now this, according to the solicitor, was lurid and harmful, factually incorrect and offensive to Mr. Miller. But as I say, Marvel published cinema, and their solicitors sent back a reply in which they quoted the same thing and then added, "You do not say what meaning you ascribe to this passage, but as it is, we cannot agree that it is defamatory of your client. All that is suggested," and this of course is the significance of the reference to Hampstead and Kensington, "is that these short interest films do not appeal to the more hypercritical and sophisticated audiences." We would have thought that Mr. Miller would agree. His company's films are included in all sorts of cinema programs, and his purpose must be to provide films which interest the broad majority of film goers. And later, only a couple of months later, the Marvel solicitor wrote to me and said, "I'm pleased to inform you, we have heard nothing further from Mr. Miller's solicitors. Accordingly, I think we can safely assume he will not be pursuing his claims." I got off again. But I wouldn't let it lie. I'd become somewhat obsessed by, well, being censored, I suppose, partly, but also censorship. And then there were two awful events. At that time, there were a lot of sex cinemas operating in big cities throughout the UK illegally. And so they had no checks. Blind eyes were turned to them, but they were often death traps without fire exits and so forth. And there was one appalling incident where somebody who'd been refused admission to one of these cinemas then set it alight, and I'm afraid several people died in that fire. And there was a piece in the New Statesman, and Steve Platt said that because there are no checks on safety or fire regulations, men died in Saturday's fire who might otherwise have been alive today. Sexual intolerance kills. That went very deep with me, and the more so because of a much more famous incident, which was that of the Satanic Verses and its author Salman Rushdie. We all know, of course, about the fatwa, but as a result of that fatwa, people were demonstrating against this book around the world, and again people were dying. I'm pretty sure I'm right in saying that one of the publishers was assassinated in one country. I thought, this just cannot continue. I have to make a stand on this, and I decided to bring out an anti-censorship magazine, the first of its kind. And this was it. It was called Scapegoat, Volume 1, Number 1. £2.50, as you can see, but just checked on eBay, and it's now for sale because it's rare for £19.99 plus post and package. But if you're a Patreon subscriber, you get one free. I won't go on about that. Anyway, so I had enormous fun bringing this magazine out. I did virtually all the work, but we had some marvelous contributions from the likes of Mark Commode, Julian Petley, who's still an anti-censorship campaigner to this day, my friends Alan Jones and David Flint. And what I was most proud of was an international censorship survey. So I contacted people around the world and asked them to send me reports about censorship in their country. and I think it must have been the first time this had ever happened. It took ages to put together, but I was extremely proud of it. The odd thing is that the aforementioned David Flint wrote an article about a man called David Alton, MP. He was very, very, very much in favour of censorship, and David Flint decided to expose him, with the result that his article was censored in an anti-censorship magazine. So legal advisors told us that a personal attack on a serving MP is not justified nor substantiated as to allegations contained therein. So we had to cut it, and it was so late in the day, it was just about to be published, and we were left with a blank space in the magazine. How about that? And David said, it's a shame we've had to do this, but Scapegoat will make enough enemies as it is without giving them the ammunition with which to kill it. There you are. That was Scapegoat. I did what I had to do. Let me just check the time again, because it's time for a word from our delightful host, Peccadillo Pictures. So have a quick look at this. I think you'll like it, because I'm told that it's very appropriate to this screening. Have a look at this, and then please stay with us. Join me again in a couple of minutes.
Ya pues, weón, cuenta, ¿por qué llegaste para acá? Para aguantar acá hay que ser muy macho, compadre.
18, 19, 21.
El Platón se dio al tiro con vos. Quiere decir que soy una buena persona.
Dicen que dormían juntos. Para vos.
No tengo plata.
Invítame a almorzar y ya está. Entonces, ¿por qué ahora estáis tanto la cintura? Para no caerme. ¿Cómo me verían los demás?
Ansiedad.
¡Ya tu madre!
¡Ayuda!